a galactic empire panicked when an ancient emotion they'd erased suddenly reappeared. All because one alien tasted something no species was meant to crave. And if a single bite can ignite a revolution, what else have we forgotten to feel? Tell me where you're watching from, subscribe to help the channel grow, and let's begin. Chicago, 2478. International District. The transport pod descended through layers of smog and sound that made Zortal's sensory membranes contract in disgust. His metallic blue skin reflected the neon chaos below as he recorded his initial assessment into his datapad with mechanical precision. Observation 1. Earth's dominant species has achieved faster than light travel, yet cannot regulate atmospheric pollutants. Observation 2. Audio frequencies suggest emotional dysregulation on a planetary scale. Observation 3. Thermal signatures indicate widespread inefficiency in energy consumption. He stepped onto the platform, his movements exact and economical, everything a Varkal should be. Around him, humans rushed past in their peculiar chaotic dance, laughing too loudly, touching too frequently, existing too messily. They reminded him of children playing at civilization. A human approached, shorter than him by half a meter, with graying hair and flour dusted across his apron. The human smiled, a gesture Zortal's species had engineered out of their genetic code 8,000 years ago as inefficient emotional expression. Ambassador Zortal? I'm Marco Santoro, your cultural liaison. Welcome to Earth. Liaison, Zortal repeated, his voice like ice cracking. I require no mediation with your species. I am here to observe, catalog, and report. The Galactic Union questions whether humanity deserves continued membership. Your emotional instability concerns the Council. Marco's smile didn't falter. Then you'll love my pizzeria. Emotional instability is kind of our signature dish. So, they walked through streets that assaulted every sense Zortal possessed. Music spilled from doorways in discordant waves. Humans consumed food while walking, an act of stunning inefficiency. Children ran between adults with no apparent destination. It was beautiful chaos, and it made Zortal's skin crawl with something he refused to name as fascination. The pizzeria was small, warm, and smelled like nothing in Zortal's memory banks. Humans sat at tables, talking and laughing, food half forgotten as they connected through words and proximity. On his homeworld, meals were solitary infusions of precisely calculated nutrients. This was something else entirely. Marco gestured to a booth. Sit, please. You've had a long journey. My species does not experience fatigue in the manner yours does, Zortal said, but he sat anyway, his posture rigid. We have optimized our biological processes beyond such primitive needs. Right. And when was the last time you ate something just because it tasted good? Zortal's inner eyelids blinked, a sign of confusion he immediately suppressed. My species does not eat. We absorb nutrients through direct infusion. Oral consumption is wasteful. Your digestive process converts less than 30% of consumed matter into usable energy. It is inefficient by every measurable standard. Marco vanished into the kitchen and returned with a plate that steamed and glistened under the warm lights. The smell intensified, hitting Zortal like a physical thing. Tomato, cheese, herbs he couldn't name. His sensory processor struggled to categorize the complexity. This is pizza, Marco said, sliding the plate forward. 4 generations of my family have made this. My father used to say that food isn't about efficiency. It's about memory. Your father was scientifically incorrect. Maybe, but he was happy. Marco's eyes held something Zortal recognized from his research. Grief, carefully contained. Try one bite, for diplomacy. I cannot. My biology does not accommodate. Trust me, Excellence, this is diplomacy. Melted. Zortal looked at the slice. His species had rules about sensory indulgence, ancient prohibitions born from wars fought over pleasure and desire. But he was here to study humans, and humans apparently defined themselves through this wasteful ritual. He picked up the slice with clinical precision, analyzed its thermal signature, calculated its molecular composition. Then, more out of anthropological duty than desire, he bit. The world stopped. Heat flooded his mouth, not painful, but present in a way he'd never experienced. Cheese stretched and pulled, its texture entirely foreign to any simulation. Tomato tang cut through, bright and alive. The crust cracked between his teeth, offering resistance, then surrender. His sensory nodes, dormant for centuries of optimized nutrition, suddenly screamed to life. Zortal froze, his hand still raised, sauce on his chin, his carefully maintained composure shattered by bread and cheese and heat. Marco watched with knowing eyes. So, Zortal set down the slice with trembling fingers. He looked at the pizza, then at Marco, then at the humans around him laughing and eating and living their inefficient, wasteful, beautiful lives. His datapad lay forgotten on the table. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the gravity of a cosmic revelation. Humans, dominate the heat. Marco smiled wider. That's just the beginning, Ambassador. The pizza sat on the table between them, cooling slowly. Marco stood to help another customer, leaving Zortal alone with the plate. It will get cold, Excellence, Marco called over his shoulder. And then not even the gods can save it. Zortal stared at the remaining slices. His species had conquered entropy, mapped the cosmic web, achieved biological immortality. They had forgotten how to want things. But sitting in that small pizzeria in Chicago, surrounded by the chaos of human joy, Zortal discovered he wanted a second bite more than he'd wanted anything in 3,000 years. And that terrified him more than any diplomatic failure ever could. The temporary quarters the Union had secured for him were efficient and sterile, exactly like every Virkal habitat throughout the galaxy, climate-controlled to within 0.03 degrees, soundproofed against Earth's chaos. Perfect. Zortal sat in the geometric chair and placed the wrapped package on the table before him. Marco had insisted he take the remaining slices, had wrapped them carefully in something called foil with the kind of attention Zortal reserved for diplomatic treaties. The wrapping crinkled as he stared at it. Through the thin material he could still smell it. Tomato, cheese, that inexplicable warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. He should dispose of it. His species had abandoned oral consumption during the Reformation when the Council of Elders had decreed that pleasure-seeking had nearly destroyed their civilization. The sensory wars had taught them that desire led to conflict, that satisfaction bred want, that the pursuit of feeling was a path to extinction. For 8,000 years the Virkal had been content, efficient, perfect. Zortal unwrapped the pizza. A memory surfaced, unbidden and unwelcome. He'd been young, barely 300 cycles old, in the education center. He'd laughed at something, a spontaneous burst of sound that had felt like sunlight in his chest. The instructor had stopped mid-lesson, her face cold with disappointment. Emotional expression is primitive residue, she'd said, her voice cutting through his joy like frost. You are Virkal. You are beyond such things. Such displays suggest cognitive malfunction. He'd never laughed again. None of them did. Joy was a malfunction. Pleasure was a disease. They'd been taught this from birth, had it encoded into their educational matrices, had watched countless simulations of their ancestors tearing their civilization apart over passions they couldn't control. Better to feel nothing than to feel too much. The pizza sat before him, cooling, but still fragrant. This is research, Zortal said aloud to the empty room, cultural immersion, diplomatic necessity. His hand reached for a slice before he'd consciously decided to move. The second bite was different from the first. Without Marco watching, without the noise of the pizzeria, without the excuse of diplomacy, it was just him and the food and the sensation. The cheese pulled and stretched. The flavors built on each other, complex and layered. His mouth remembered the texture, anticipated it, wanted it. His datapad chimed with an incoming message from the Union, but he ignored it. Took another bite. The crust crackled. Herbs he couldn't name exploded across his tongue. Something warm bloomed in his chest, spreading outward like a slow dawn. This was pleasure, raw and undeniable. The thing his species had spent millennia running from. His hand trembled as he reached for another slice. This is a neurological reaction, he told himself, trying to impose order on the chaos in his mind. Chemical responses to specific flavor compounds triggering reward pathways, nothing more. But even as he said it, he knew he was lying. This wasn't about chemistry, it was about something deeper, something his species had tried to delete from their collective memory. The simple, stubborn joy of experiencing something good. He finished the second slice, looked at the third. His species ate once every lunar cycle through nutrient infusion that took minutes and left no waste, no desire, no memory. Efficient, clean, empty. Zortal ate the third slice, then the fourth. By the time he'd finished, his face was hot, his movements uncoordinated, his thoughts scattered like stars. He felt full in a way he'd never experienced, not satisfied, but sated. His body hummed with energy it didn't need and couldn't use. Inefficient, wasteful, wonderful. He pulled up his datapad with sticky fingers and began to type his daily report. But the words that appeared weren't the clinical observations he'd intended. Observation 12. Humans create happiness from flour and water and time. They transform survival into experience. They choose pleasure despite its inefficiency. This should be weakness. Why does it feel like strength? He paused, stared at what he'd written. His fingers hovered over the delete function. Instead, he added one more line. Personal note. I understand now why we feared this. It changes everything. He looked at the empty wrapping, stained with sauce and oil, and felt something his species had bred out long ago. Anticipation. The desire to experience that feeling again. The hope that tomorrow Marco might offer him another slice. The addiction had already begun. Outside his window, Chicago hummed with life and noise and waste and joy. Somewhere in that chaos, a small pizzeria was closing for the night, its owner cleaning counters and feeding a 200-year-old starter, keeping memory alive through simple, stubborn care. Zortal pressed his hand against the window, felt the vibration of the city through the glass. For the first time in 3,000 years, he wasn't thinking about efficiency or duty or the careful emptiness his species called peace. He was thinking about lunch tomorrow, and somewhere deep in his genetic memory, something ancient and dangerous and beautiful began to wake up. 3 weeks into his assignment, Zortal had visited 17 different pizzerias across Chicago. His official reports had become increasingly concerning to the Virkal High Command, though he couldn't quite bring himself to care. Observation 43. Humans create communal bonds through shared consumption. The act of eating together serves no nutritional advantage, yet produces measurable increases in social cohesion. Psychological necessity masquerading as biological need. Observation 59. Human establishments called restaurants function as tribal gathering spaces. Food is secondary to connection. They are not feeding bodies. They are feeding something else. Something we removed from ourselves long ago. Observation 74. Emotional state and digestive process appear neurologically linked in humans. They describe sadness as hollow, joy as filling, love as nourishing. Their metaphors reveal truth we have forgotten. They still remember that feeling, and eating are the same thing. "You're here again," Marco said, not looking up from the dough he was kneading. It was late afternoon, the lunch rush over, the dinner crowd yet to arrive. The pizzeria held that golden afternoon quiet that Zortal had come to crave almost as much as the food itself. "I am conducting thorough research," Zortal said, settling into what had become his usual booth. "Cultural immersion requires repeated observation." "Right, research." Marco's smile was gentle, knowing. "The usual?" Perhaps with the addition of those small fish, anchovies. I have been analyzing their sodium content and flavor profile interaction with the cheese matrix. You've been analyzing how good they taste. That is what I said. Marco laughed, and Zortal found himself producing a sound that might have been a laugh in return. It came out wrong, broken and rusty, like machinery that hadn't been used in millennia. But it was there, undeniable. Marco froze, his hands still in the dough. Did you just... I did not, Zortal said quickly. Virkal, do not laugh. It was a respiratory irregularity. The air quality in this city is suboptimal. Sure, Marco said, but his eyes were bright. Respiratory irregularity. I'll make your pizza, Ambassador. While he waited, Zortal pulled up his datapad and scrolled through the increasingly frantic messages from the Union. His superior, Commander Velkoth, had requested 3 separate status updates. His colleagues had filed formal concerns about his mental stability. The High Council had noted his failure to return to the mothership for scheduled debriefings. He marked them all as read and continued typing his daily observations. When Marco brought the pizza, he didn't immediately return to the kitchen. Instead, he slid into the booth across from Zortal, something he'd never done before. His expression was different, quieter, more serious. Can I ask you something? Marco said. You may inquire. Why did your people stop eating? Really? Zortal set down his slice. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. He should deflect, file it under cultural differences and move on. Instead, he found himself answering honestly. Efficiency, he said. That is the official reason. But the truth is older and darker. 10,000 years ago, we nearly destroyed ourselves. Not with weapons, with desire. We wanted too much, felt too deeply, fought over pleasure and beauty and taste. The sensory wars killed billions. When it ended, the survivors decided feeling was the enemy. So we removed it, systematically, completely. Marco's face softened. You didn't remove it. You just buried it. Perhaps. Zortal looked at the pizza, at the steam rising from it, at the way the light caught the oil on its surface. Your species still risks it. The chaos, the wanting. Why? Because happiness isn't efficient, Marco said quietly. It's not supposed to be. My father, he brought his grandmother's starter from Italy when he emigrated. Kept it alive through the crossing, through poverty, through loss. Every day feeding it, maintaining it, keeping it going. You know how much work that is? How inefficient? Extremely. Yeah, but that starter is over 200 years old. It's in every pizza I make. It's memory-made food. It's my great-great-grandmother's hands, my grandfather's patience, my father's love. That's not efficient. But it's what makes us human. We choose the work. We choose to feel it. We choose to remember. Something shifted in Zortal's chest. And happiness? Is that efficient? Marco's smile returned, sad and warm simultaneously. No, Ambassador, but it's worth every wasted moment. They sat in comfortable silence while Zortal ate. Outside, the city moved through its afternoon rituals. Inside, 2 beings from different worlds shared space and food and something that might have been friendship. The Union is concerned about you, Marco said eventually. I've been getting inquiries. They think you've been compromised. I have been, Zortal said simply. I have been compromised by cheese and tomato and dough that remembers 2 centuries of human care. I have been compromised by laughter and warmth and the realization that my species chose survival over living. I am entirely compromised. What will you tell them? The truth. Zortal pulled up his datapad and began typing. That humanity's strength is not their technology or their expansion or their adaptability. It is their willingness to be inefficient, to choose joy knowing it costs them, to maintain memory even when forgetting would be easier, to laugh even when laughing changes nothing. He paused, then added one final line. Recommendation. The Galactic Union should fear humanity. Not because they are dangerous, because they remember what the rest of us forgot. And memory, I am learning, is the most powerful force in the universe. He sent the report before he could reconsider. Marco watched him, concern and pride mixed in his expression. They're going to come for you, aren't they? Undoubtedly. Was it worth it? Jortal looked at the half-eaten pizza before him, at the man who'd taught an ancient alien how to want things again, at the small pizzeria that had become more home than anywhere he'd lived in 3,000 years. Yes, he said, and produced that broken, rusty laugh again. This time it sounded almost right. Marco grinned. Then we'd better make sure you're ready. The datapad chimed. Incoming priority message from the High Council. Not a request this time, an order. Delegation en route. Prepare for immediate evaluation and extraction. This is not negotiable. Jortal read it twice, then set the device face down on the table and reached for another slice. If they were coming to take him back to that cold, empty efficiency, he would face them full of warmth and memory and pizza. He would face them human. The integration happened gradually, then all at once. Chicago's International District had a way of absorbing outsiders, and Jortal, for all his blue skin and formal speech, was no exception. It started with Carlos, the delivery driver who'd nearly crashed his bike avoiding Jortal on the sidewalk. Instead of anger, he'd laughed and said, "Yo, spaceman, you good?" When Jortal had struggled with the idiom, Carlos had spent 20 minutes teaching him Earth slang while his pizzas went cold. Then there was Yuki, the music student from the apartment above the pizzeria, who'd heard Jortal attempting to understand jazz and had simply sat beside him, explaining how improvisation was organized chaos. Like your people's mathematics, she'd said, but with feeling instead of proofs. Che. The owner of the bookstore next door started saving him newspapers. The barista learned he preferred his coffee temperature exactly 93 degrees. The neighborhood children stopped being afraid of his appearance and started asking if his skin was naturally blue or if he'd fallen into paint. It is dermal pigmentation based on crystalline cellular structures, he'd explained to a 6-year-old named Maya. She'd considered this seriously, then asked, "But does it feel like regular skin?" When he'd admitted he didn't know what regular skin felt like, she'd simply taken his hand in hers and said, "Like that." Marco watched all of this with quiet satisfaction, occasionally intervening when cultural misunderstandings got too complex. He'd become something between a guide and a guardian, though Jortal couldn't quite categorize the relationship in Virkal terms. "You know what a high five is?" Carlos asked one evening, demonstrating the gesture with Yuki. "I do not understand the purpose. You are striking each other's hands. Is this combat training?" They laughed, and Carlos raised his hand. "Try it, Ambassador. When something good happens, you celebrate like this." Jortal raised his hand, calculated the angle and velocity, and completely missed. His palm hit Carlos's wrist, then his elbow, then somehow his own face. The entire pizzeria erupted in laughter, and after a moment of confusion, Jortal found himself laughing too, really laughing. Not that broken mechanical sound, but something that came from deep in his chest and felt like sunlight. "That was terrible," he said between laughs. "My coordination protocols are clearly malfunctioning." "Nah, man," Carlos wheezed. "You're just learning to be a person instead of a computer. Takes time." The word person settled into Jortal like a warm stone. On his world, he was a unit, a designation, a function. Here he was becoming a person. Marco introduced him to ice cream that same week. Jortal's species had theoretical knowledge of frozen desserts, but theory proved inadequate. The cold shocked his system. The sweetness overwhelmed his carefully calibrated taste receptors. The texture was impossible, solid and liquid simultaneously. He stood in the middle of the gelato shop, a cone melting in his hand, and felt something crack open in his chest. Tears, that peculiar human expression of overwhelming emotion, gathered in his eyes. He'd studied them. He'd never experienced them. "Too cold?" Marco asked gently. "No," Jortal managed. "It is perfect. Too perfect. I do not have words for what this feels like. My species eliminated the vocabulary for pleasure 8,000 years ago. I am experiencing something I cannot name." "Joy?" Marco said simply. "That's called joy." That evening, after the pizzeria closed, Marco invited Jortal upstairs to the small apartment where he lived alone. The space was cluttered with photographs and old furniture and the accumulated weight of human memory. Marco opened a bottle of wine and told stories about his father. He died 3 years ago. Heart attack. Fast, at least. But this place, it felt empty after. Like the recipes didn't work the same. Like the pizza was just food instead of connection. "You were grieving," Jortal said, the words still foreign in his mouth. "I am grieving. Present tense. I don't think it stops. You just learn to carry it differently." Marco poured them both wine. "But watching you discover everything for the first time, seeing you laugh at high fives and cry over ice cream, it reminds me why my dad loved this work. He used to say that food wasn't about feeding bodies, it was about reminding people they're alive." Jortal accepted the glass, studied the way light moved through the red liquid. "Your father was wise." "He was stubborn," said that's basically the same thing. Marco smiled. "You remind me of him sometimes, that determination to care about things even when it's hard. My species would call that a malfunction." "Your species sounds lonely." The word hit Jortal like a physical blow. Lonely. Was that what he'd been? For 3,000 years, had he been lonely without knowing the word for it? The Virkal had connections, neural networks, shared knowledge, but they didn't have this. This warmth, this irrational, inefficient, beautiful need to be known by another being. "I was," he said quietly. "I have been lonely for a very long time." Marco raised his glass. "Well, you're not anymore. Welcome to the neighborhood, spaceman." They drank and talked, and somewhere in the early hours of morning, Jortal realized he'd found something the Union could never give him, a place, a purpose that wasn't about efficiency or duty or the cold mathematics of survival. He'd found people who cared whether he laughed or cried, who taught him slang and celebrated his terrible coordination, who shared wine and memory and the simple gift of presence. His datapad, forgotten on the table, chimed with increasingly urgent messages. Reports of a Union vessel approaching Earth, demands for his immediate return to the mothership, warnings about compromised cognitive function. He silenced it and poured another glass of wine. Outside, Chicago slept its restless sleep. Inside, an alien ambassador learned that treason sometimes looked like laughter, and rebellion could taste like gelato on a warm night, and revolution might just be the choice to stay instead of flee. When Marco finally dozed off in his chair, Jortal covered him with a blanket and stood at the window, looking down at the street he'd come to love. Somewhere above the atmosphere, a ship full of his people was coming to save him from happiness. He wondered if they'd understand that he didn't want to be saved. More likely they'd never asked themselves what wanting felt like in the first place. The ship descended at dawn, its presence announced not by noise but by the sudden unnatural silence it created. Birds stopped singing, traffic seemed to quiet, Chicago held its breath. Jortal felt her arrival before he saw her. Kelrin of the High Council, First Inspector of Cultural Compliance, Architect of the Reformation Protocols. If they'd sent her, this wasn't a rescue, it was an execution. She materialized in the pizzeria at precisely 800 hours, her form coalescing from transported particles with mathematical precision. Where Jortal had allowed himself to become slightly rumpled, his uniform creased from too many meals at Marco's table, Kelrin was flawless. Her skin held that perfect blue sheen of someone who'd never questioned their programming. Her eyes were cold stars. "Ambassador Jortal," she said, and even her voice was precisely calibrated. "I am here to complete your extraction and decontamination. Darsha, good morning to you too, Jortal replied, and watched her pupils contract at his use of human greeting protocols. Marco emerged from the kitchen, took in the scene with quick understanding, and somehow conveyed both welcome and warning in his smile. You must be from the Union. Coffee? We've got a blend that's out of this world. Kelrin's gaze swept over Marco with clinical assessment.
You are the contamination source. The human who has compromised a Virkal diplomatic officer through sustained exposure to sensory stimulation. I'm the guy who makes pizza, Marco corrected. Would you like some? You look like you've had a long journey. I do not eat. None of our species eat. It is primitive, wasteful, indicative of biological limitations we surpassed millennia ago. Right? So that's a no on the pizza. Jortal found himself stepping between them, a protective gesture that would have been unthinkable months ago. Kelrin, I have been conducting comprehensive cultural research. Your reports have detailed progressive cognitive compromise. She pulled up a holographic display of his transmissions, highlighting sections in pulsing red. You use emotional descriptors, metaphorical language, subjective assessment. This is not research. This is contamination. I call it learning. You are Virkal. We do not learn. We already know. The statement hung in the air, and Jortal realized how perfectly it summarized everything wrong with his species. They'd achieved such heights of knowledge that they'd forgotten how to discover. They knew everything except how to want to know more. Then perhaps, he said carefully, we should start learning again. Kelrin's composure fractured for exactly 0.3 seconds. Shock, quickly suppressed. You have 48 hours to undergo rehabilitation protocols. After that, you will return to the mothership, undergo memory restructuring, and resume your duties. This infection will be excised. And if I refuse? Then you will be classified as deserted, severed from the collective neural network, removed from all Virkal databases. You will cease to exist as one of us. She delivered this with the emotion one might use to describe weather patterns. It is equivalent to death. Marco's hand found Jortal's shoulder, warm and steady. He's not going anywhere. This human presumes to speak for you? Kelrin's disgust was palpable. Have you fallen so far that you require a lesser species to defend you? Careful, Jortal said, and his voice carried an edge he didn't know he possessed. You speak of my friend, and humans are not lesser. They are different. They feel things we've forgotten existed. They choose to care even when caring costs everything. They're brave in ways we can't measure because we deleted bravery from our vocabulary along with every other dangerous emotion. Kelrin stepped closer, her voice dropping to something almost like concern. Jortal, listen to yourself. This is not you speaking. This is the contamination. The humans have infected you with their chaos, their inefficiency, their feelings. You are compromised. No, he said quietly. I was compromised before I came here. We all are. We traded living for existing. We chose emptiness and called it peace. I was compromised by 8,000 years of nothing. And this, she gestured at the pizzeria, at Marco, at the normal morning light streaming through windows. This is better? This chaos? This waste? Yes. The word fell between them like a declaration of war. Kelrin's expression shifted through confusion, anger, and something that might have been fear before settling back into cold neutrality. You have 48 hours, she repeated. I will return for your decision. Choose wisely, Jortal. Choose your species. Choose your people. Choose the collective that has sustained you for 3 millennia. She dematerialized, leaving only the faint scent of ozone and the heavy weight of an impossible choice. Marco squeezed Jortal's shoulder. You okay? No. Jortal sank into his usual booth, suddenly exhausted in a way nutrient infusion had never prepared him for. I am not okay. She is offering me existence or experience,
safety or sensation, everything I was or everything I've become. What do you want? The question was so simple, so human. His species had engineered away want along with everything else. But sitting in that warm pizzeria, smelling bread and coffee and life, Zortal knew his answer. He'd known it the moment he'd laughed, the moment he'd cried over ice cream, the moment he'd realized loneliness wasn't the absence of people, but the absence of connection. "I want to stay," he whispered. "I want to stay so badly it frightens me. Is that normal? This wanting?" Marco smiled, sad and understanding. "Yeah, Ambassador. That's the most normal thing in the universe." "Then why does it feel like dying?" "Because it is. The old you is dying. The one who didn't laugh or cry or care about anything. He's dying so someone new can live. That's called growth. It hurts, but it's worth it." Zortal looked at his hands, at the flour still dusted on his sleeves from helping Marco prep dough yesterday, at the stains of living that no amount of Vir-Call efficiency could remove. He thought about Kelrin's offer. Return to the collective. Forget the taste of pizza. Let them remove his memory of laughter and friendship and that moment when he'd realized he wasn't alone anymore. Safe. Empty. Dead in everything but biological function. Or stay. Feel everything. Risk everything. Live. Outside, Chicago moved through its morning chaos. Every human out there choosing life over mere existence. Choosing to feel even when feeling hurt. They were messy and inefficient and beautiful. And Zortal wanted more than anything to be part of their imperfect world. 48 hours, he said quietly. How much pizza can we eat in 48 hours? Marco laughed, but it was tight with emotion. All of it, spaceman. We'll eat all of it. They sat in silence while the city woke up around them, both knowing that in 2 days, Zortal would have to choose between everything he'd been and everything he wanted to become. And both knowing without saying it, that some choices cost more than existence itself. They cost your whole world. The 48 hours felt like sand through fingers, every moment precious, every meal weighted with meaning. Zortal found himself memorizing details he'd never noticed before. The way flour caught in the afternoon light, the sound of Marco's laughter, the specific creak of his favorite booth. On the second night, after the dinner rush had faded and the last customers had left with full bellies and easy smiles, Marco locked the door and turned to Zortal with an expression that carried the weight of confession. "There's something I need to show you," he said. "Something my father showed me. Something that makes this more than just food." He led Zortal into the kitchen, past the ovens and prep stations, to a small alcove where a ceramic container sat like a shrine. Marco opened it carefully, reverently, and the smell that rose up was ancient and alive. Yeast and time. Patience fermented into essence. "This is our starter," Marco said quietly. 217 years old. My great-great-grandmother carried it from Naples to New York in 1857, in a jar wrapped in her wedding dress, because it was the most precious thing she owned besides her children. Zortal stared at the bubbling mixture. It is alive. More than alive. Its memory made manifest. Every pizza I make, every slice you've eaten, it's made with this. With dough that contains cells that my great-great-grandmother fed with her own hands. My great-grandfather kept it alive through the Depression. My grandfather fed it during the war. My father nursed it through illness and loss and grief. Marco's voice caught, and he paused to collect himself. When my father died, this was the only thing I couldn't bear to lose. Everything else I could have walked away from. The pizzeria, the recipes, the building. But this needed me to survive. And somehow, needing to care for it kept me alive too. It requires constant attention, Zortal observed. Daily feeding, temperature regulation, it is profoundly inefficient. It's profoundly human. Marco smiled through the shine in his eyes. We keep things alive not because they're useful, but because they matter, because memory deserves to be fed, because love doesn't end just because someone dies. It keeps going, gets folded into bread, gets shared with strangers who become friends. Jortal reached out, then paused. "May I?" "Of course." He touched the container's edge, felt the warmth of fermentation, the living proof of care sustained across centuries. His species had monuments that lasted millennia. Perfect, unchanging, dead. This starter was imperfect, required constant work, threatened always by neglect or contamination. It survived only because humans chose, every single day, to keep it alive. "My species had something like this once," Jortal said softly. "Before the Reformation. We had traditions passed through generations, foods that mattered, songs that carried memory. But after the sensory wars, after we saw how desire and feeling nearly destroyed us, we eliminated everything that required emotional investment." "What happened?" "We survived. We achieved perfect efficiency. We conquered entropy and death and chaos. We became unstoppable." He paused. "And we became empty. We preserved existence and lost every reason that made existence worth preserving." Marco's hand rested on Jortal's shoulder, that gesture of human comfort he'd come to recognize. "Kelrin, your inspector. She lost someone in those wars, didn't she?" "Her entire family unit. 43 individuals, consumed by passion-driven conflict over resources they desired but didn't need. She was 300 cycles old, young. She watched emotion destroy everything she loved. Of course she built walls against feeling. Of course she sees my transformation as disease. To her, I'm becoming the thing that killed her family." "But she's wrong." "Is she?" Jortal turned to face Marco fully. "What if the Viracall are right? What if emotion is dangerous? Your species wages wars over feelings, hatred, greed, jealousy. You hurt each other constantly. You destroy relationships over misunderstandings. You make terrible choices because feelings override logic. Maybe we were right to cut it all away." Marco was quiet for a long moment, his hand still moving in slow circles on the starter's surface, feeding memory through touch and attention. When he spoke, his voice was steady. "My father had a saying. He'd say, 'Marco, the thing about fire is it burns. That's not a flaw. That's what fire does. You can spend your whole life afraid of being burned, never getting warm, or you can learn to carry fire carefully, to feed it right, to respect what it can do. Yeah, sometimes you'll get burned, but you'll also cook food, light darkness, and keep people warm." He looked up, meeting Jortal's gaze. "Emotion is fire, love burns, grief burns, even joy can burn if you're not careful. But you don't solve fire by eliminating heat. You solve it by learning to carry it. That's what makes us human. We get burned and we keep reaching for warmth anyway. That is remarkably illogical. That's remarkably alive." Jortal looked at the starter again, at this living thing that had survived wars and migrations and loss because humans chose work over ease, chose care over efficiency, chose to remember even when forgetting would hurt less. "She will come tomorrow," he said quietly. "Kelrin, she will ask me to choose. What will you tell her?" "I do not know. If I stay, I lose my species, my collective, my identity. Everything I have been for 3,000 years dies." "And if you go?" Jortal touched his chest, where something warm and alive had taken root over these months. Something that laughed and cried and wanted things with irrational intensity. Something that had learned to care about a 200-year-old jar of yeast and the stubborn, beautiful human who fed it every day. "If I go," he whispered, "I lose myself." They stood in silence, two beings from different worlds, united by the understanding that some choices aren't between good and bad, but between different types of death. The death of who you were or the death of who you're becoming. The death of belonging or the death of authenticity. Marco began feeding the starter, his movements ritualistic and precise. My father used to say that this starter taught him everything he needed to know about life. You want to know what it taught me? Yes, that some things only stay alive if someone chooses every day to feed them, to care, to do the work even when it's hard, even when it would be easier to let it die. Love is like that. Hope is like that. Humanity is like that. He looked at Zortal with eyes that had known loss and chosen warmth anyway. You're like that now too. Whatever you choose tomorrow, you're not the person who arrived here months ago. That version of you is already gone. Now you just have to decide what grows in its place. Zortal watched the bubbles rise in the starter, watched life perpetuate itself through nothing more complicated than care and time, and the stubborn refusal to let memory die. Thank you, he said finally, for feeding me, not just with pizza, with everything else. Thank you for remembering how to be fed. Outside, the last light faded from Chicago's sky. Somewhere above the atmosphere, Kelrin waited in her perfect, efficient ship, ready to offer salvation through forgetting. And down on Earth, in a small pizzeria kitchen, an alien learned that the opposite of forgetting wasn't just remembering. It was choosing to feed what you wanted to keep alive, even when keeping it alive cost you everything else. The last morning came too quickly and too slowly at the same time. Zortal woke in the small apartment Marco had offered him, surrounded by the accumulated evidence of his transformation. Human clothes draped over chairs, books with pages dog-eared and marked, a half-empty bottle of wine they'd shared 3 nights ago while Marco told stories about his father. He'd made his decision sometime in the dark hours before dawn, not because he wanted to, but because he had to, because choosing himself meant abandoning his entire species to their empty existence, because staying meant giving up any chance of bringing what he'd learned back to the Virkal, because love, he discovered, sometimes meant letting go of what you wanted most. He would return with Kelrin. He would undergo the rehabilitation. He would forget pizza and laughter and the way Marco's eyes crinkled when he smiled. He would forget he'd ever learned how to want things. And maybe, somewhere in that forgetting, he could preserve some fragment of this experience, some spark that could eventually ignite change in his frozen people. It was logical. It was selfless. It was the right thing to do. It felt like dying. Marco knew before Zortal said anything. He'd been kneading dough when Zortal entered the kitchen, and his hands stilled at whatever he saw in the alien's expression. "You're going back," Marco said quietly. "I have to. My species needs someone who remembers this, who remembers there's another way. If I stay here, I'm just one person happy. If I go back, maybe I can change everything eventually." "That's very noble." Marco's voice was careful. "That's also complete bullshit." Zortal's head snapped up. "Excuse me? You're afraid." Marco resumed kneading, his movements sharp now. "You're afraid that choosing happiness is selfish. You're afraid that wanting this means you're weak. You're afraid that if you stay, you're giving up on your people. But Zortal, you can't save people who don't want to be saved, and you can't sacrifice yourself to make a point no one's listening for." "You do not understand?" "I understand perfectly. My father did the same thing, worked himself into the ground trying to keep the pizzeria perfect, trying to honor his father's memory, trying to make sure everyone else ate well while he forgot to feed himself. You know what that got him? Dead at 67. Heart attack in the kitchen he loved, because he thought duty mattered more than living." The words hung between them, sharp and true. Zortal felt something crack in his chest. "I do not want to leave," he whispered. "I want to stay more than I have ever wanted anything. But how can I choose myself when my entire species is dying of emptiness?" By showing them it's possible to choose, by living well, by being proof that there's another way. Marco's eyes were wet now. You think going back and forgetting will help them. All that does is prove their point. That feeling is dangerous, that it should be eliminated. But if you stay, if you thrive, if you live so fully that even across space they hear about the Virkal who chose pizza over perfection, then maybe someone else will wonder if they can choose too. Or maybe I am simply selfish, Yeah, maybe. But maybe selfish is just another word for self-preservation. Maybe choosing yourself isn't giving up on them. Maybe it's showing them what's worth choosing. Before Jortal could respond, the door chimed. And again. And again. Within minutes, the pizzeria was filling with people. Carlos and Yuki, the bookstore owner, the barista, the children from down the street, delivery drivers and musicians and students and strangers who'd become friends over shared meals and easy laughter. They kept coming, dozens of them. The pizzeria and the street outside filling with humans who'd somehow learned that tonight was goodbye. "We heard you were leaving," Carlos said, his usual easy smile forced. "Wanted to throw you a proper send-off." I did not expect." Jortal couldn't finish the sentence. His linguistic protocols were failing under the weight of emotion. Yuki stepped forward, pressed something into his hands. "A recording. Every jazz session we shared, so you don't forget how chaos can be beautiful." The bookstore owner gave him a worn copy of poetry. "You said you didn't understand metaphor. Maybe this will help you remember that logic isn't the only language." Maya, the 6-year-old, offered a drawing of a tall blue figure eating pizza with a huge smile. "So you remember you're supposed to be happy." One by one they came, each with a story, each with a memory, each with evidence that he'd mattered, that he'd touched their lives in small human ways that added up to something huge. "You helped me with that math problem," a delivery driver said. "Spent 2 hours teaching me algebra when you could have been doing anything else." "You listened when I cried about my breakup," a waitress added. "Didn't try to fix it, just sat there and listened." "You taught my kid that being different is okay," a parent said. "That having blue skin or brown skin or any skin is just, being alive." The stories kept coming, and Jortal felt himself breaking apart and coming together simultaneously. He'd been convinced he was insignificant, that his existence mattered only in service to grand purposes and efficient systems. But these humans were telling him something his species had forgotten. That significance wasn't about grand gestures. It was about showing up, listening, caring about algebra and breakups and children's fears. It was about being present for the small moments that, accumulated, became a life. Marco brought out pizza. Dozens of them, fresh and hot, and made with 200-year-old starter that remembered what it meant to be fed with love. They ate together. This community that had adopted an alien without question, and Jortal understood what his species had lost. Not just pleasure or sensation or feeling. They'd lost this. Connection. Belonging. The knowledge that you mattered because you'd chosen to matter to others, and they'd chosen to matter to you. When the last slice was gone and the crowd began to thin, Jortal stood in the center of the empty pizzeria, Marco beside him, and tried to find words. "You have taught me," he said, voice breaking, "that pleasure is not a vice. That feeling is not weakness. That efficiency is not the same as living. You have shown me that memory lives when someone cares enough to feed it. That joy is worth the cost. That being human is not about being perfect, but about choosing every day to try." He paused, tears flowing freely now. Virkal didn't cry, hadn't cried in 10,000 years. But he did. He let himself feel every bit of the grief and gratitude and love that threatened to overwhelm him. "You have taught me what my species forgot," he finished. "That the purpose of existence is not to survive efficiently, it is to live fully, to matter to someone, to care about things that don't make logical sense because caring is its own logic. You have taught me to be alive. And I will never forget that, no matter what they do to my memory." Marco hugged him, that strange human gesture of pressing bodies together to communicate what words couldn't. The others joined, and Jortal found himself at the center of a mass of warm, inefficient, perfect human affection. "You don't have to go," Marco whispered. "You could stay. Choose yourself. Choose us." Jortal wanted it so badly he could taste it,
bitter and sweet like the first bite of pizza that had changed everything. But before he could answer, the lights outside shifted. Kelrin had arrived. The transport beam materialized her in the doorway, perfect and cold and everything Zortal had been before pizza taught him to thaw. "It is time," she said. "Come home, Zortal." He looked at her, then at Marco, then at the empty plates and full hearts around him. And in that moment, staring at two impossible futures, Zortal realized that Marco had been right. Martyrdom wouldn't change the Virkal. Living would. Choosing would. Being so obviously, defiantly happy that even across the galaxy, others would wonder what that felt like. He turned to Kelrin, and for the first time in his long, efficient, empty life, Zortal made a choice based not on duty or logic or the greater good. He chose based on what he wanted. "No," he said simply. The word hung in the air like a declaration of war. No. Simple. Absolute. Revolutionary. Kelrin's perfect composure fractured. Her eyes widened, her posture shifted, her carefully maintained neutrality cracking to reveal something underneath. Shock. Then anger. Then something that looked almost like fear. "You refuse?" Her voice was still controlled, but barely. "You understand what this means? Severance from the collective. Exile from Virkal society. You will be erased from our history. Your name will be removed from all records. You will cease to exist as one of us." "I know," Zortal said. He walked to the counter where Marco had left one last pizza, still warm from the oven. He picked up a slice, felt its weight, its heat, its promise. "And I choose this anyway." Behind him, the humans had gone silent, watching, waiting. Marco's hand found his shoulder again, steady and sure. Kelrin took a step forward, her movement sharp now. Efficiency replaced by something that looked like desperation. "You would abandon 3,000 years of identity for bread and cheese? You would betray your species for temporary sensory pleasure?" "No." Zortal took a bite of the pizza, chewed slowly, swallowed. "I would abandon 3,000 years of emptiness for connection. I would trade biological immortality for actual living. I would betray efficiency for experience." He walked toward her, still holding the pizza, and for the first time in recorded Virkal history, an ambassador smiled at a superior officer. "I choose this," he said, "because for 3,000 years I existed. I functioned. I served. I achieved. And I was completely, utterly, devastatingly alone. Then I came here. I tasted pizza. I learned to laugh. I made friends. I cried over ice cream and failed at high fives and listened to music that made no logical sense but perfect emotional sense. And I realized something you don't want to admit." "What?" Kelrin's voice was barely a whisper. "We were wrong. The Reformation was wrong. We didn't save ourselves from destruction. We just chose a slower death. We eliminated feeling and called it progress. We removed desire and called it enlightenment. We engineered away everything that hurt, and in doing so, we eliminated everything that made pain worth surviving." Outside, more transport beams activated. Virkal security forces materializing in formation. 20 of them. 40. A show of force meant to intimidate. Marco and the humans moved closer to Zortal, forming a wall of flesh and determination between him and the waiting ships. "Stand aside," one of the security officers commanded. "This human has compromised a Virkal ambassador. He is under arrest for cultural contamination." "Try it," Carlos said, stepping forward. Around him the neighborhood materialized. More humans. Hundreds of them. Filling the street, filling doorways, standing together in that beautiful, chaotic, utterly human solidarity. "This isn't your fight," the officer said. "Yeah, it is," Yuki replied. "He's one of us now." Kelrin looked at the crowd, at the protective circle around Zortal, at the absolute refusal to yield. Something flickered across her face. Confusion, recognition, memory of a time before the Reformation, perhaps, when Viracol had stood together like this, when they'd cared enough about each other to form walls against danger. "You would risk yourselves for him?" she asked. "We would," Marco said simply. "That's what you do for people who matter." People who matter. Kelrin repeated the phrase like it was a foreign concept. He is one individual. You are many. The logical choice is to preserve the many by surrendering the one. "Logic isn't the only math that counts," Marco said. "There's also love and loyalty and the simple fact that if we let you take him, we lose something more important than one person. We lose who we are." Jortal felt something warm and overwhelming rise in his chest. These humans barely knew him. He was alien, other, fundamentally different, but they'd claimed him anyway, had decided he was worth protecting, had chosen connection over convenience. His species couldn't comprehend this. They'd engineered away tribal loyalty along with every other dangerous emotion, but these messy, inefficient humans understood something the Viracol had forgotten. That meaning came from choosing who mattered to you, then proving it through action. He stepped forward, through the protective circle, and faced Kelrin directly. In his hand, he still held the pizza. He extended it toward her, an offering, a bridge, a question. "Taste it," he said quietly. "Just one bite. Then decide if you want to take me." "I will not." "You will." He kept his hand steady. "Because somewhere under all that efficiency and control you remember. You remember what it felt like to want things. You remember before the Reformation, when your family laughed over meals and fought over dessert and lived in messy, complicated, beautiful ways. You remember what you lost, Kelrin, and you're terrified that if you taste this, you'll remember why losing it hurt." Her hand trembled, microscopically, but trembled. "This is manipulation," she said. "You are using emotional leverage. I'm offering you a choice, the same one I made. Exist efficiently or live messily, survive or thrive, remember or forget." The security forces waited. The humans watched. Marco held his breath. And Kelrin, first inspector of cultural compliance, architect of modern Viracol philosophy, stared at a slice of pizza like it was a bomb that could destroy worlds. Maybe it was. She reached out. Her fingers brushed the crust. Warm. Real. Present. Everything the Viracol had eliminated from their lives in their quest for perfect control. "One bite," Jortal said. "Then you can take me. I will go willingly. But first, remember what you're taking me from. Remember what we all lost." Kelrin lifted the slice to her mouth. Her species hadn't eaten in 8,000 years. Her body didn't remember how to chew, but her genetics did. Some part of her, buried beneath generations of engineering, still knew this ritual. She bit, and the world shifted. Her eyes widened, her pupils dilated. Her carefully maintained composure shattered completely as tomato and cheese and 200-year-old memory flooded her senses. Her knees buckled. Marco caught her, steadied her, held her while she experienced what her species had denied itself for millennia. Then, impossibly, she began to cry. Real tears, running down blue cheeks, accompanied by sounds that were half sob, half laugh, her body remembering how to feel and breaking under the weight of everything it had suppressed. "It's," she gasped. "It's warm," Jortal finished gently. "That's what humans call home." She looked at him, at the pizza, at her own hand still holding the slice, at the humans watching with understanding in their eyes, because they'd seen this transformation before, in Jortal himself. "We were wrong," she whispered. "We were so wrong." "Yes, I cannot." She looked at the security forces, at the ships waiting above. "I cannot order your return. Not now. Not after tasting this. Not after remembering what we abandoned." She straightened, somehow maintaining dignity even with tears still wet on her face. She transmitted directly to the mothership, her voice steady despite everything. "Mission status complete. Assessment
Humanity approved for permanent union membership. Recommendation: immediate cultural exchange programs. Reason. She paused, looked at Zortal, at Marco, at the neighborhood of humans who'd protected an alien for no reason except that it mattered. They transform survival into flavor. They choose meaning over efficiency. They remember how to live. The security forces lowered their weapons, confusion evident. This wasn't the extraction they'd prepared for. This was something else, something that looked like defection spreading in real time. Kelrin handed the pizza back to Zortal. I must return, report this, begin the long process of helping our species remember what we forgot. But you, Zortal of the Varkal, you stay here. You live this. You be the proof that change is possible. And you? He asked. She smiled, broken and new and real. I will be the messenger, the voice crying in our efficient wilderness, telling them there's another way. She touched his shoulder, that human gesture she'd just learned. Thank you for the contamination. It may have saved us all. She dematerialized, taking the security forces with her. The ships above began to retreat, and Zortal stood in the middle of a Chicago street, surrounded by humans, holding a slice of pizza, having just started a revolution with nothing more than cheese and stubborn care. Marco pulled him into a hug. You did it? You crazy alien? You actually did it? We did it, Zortal corrected. All of us. Humanity did this. The crowd erupted in celebration, cheering, laughing. That beautiful human chaos of joy expressed inefficiently and perfectly. And somewhere above the atmosphere, Kelrin sat in her command chair, tears still drying on her face, and began composing the most important report in Virkal history. The one that would start the Second Reformation. The one that would teach her species to remember how to feel again. All because an ambassador tasted pizza and refused to let go of happiness. All because sometimes revolution starts with a single bite. The standoff lasted 3 heartbeats, 3 human heartbeats, each one an eternity compressed into the space between decision and consequence. Kelrin stood with the pizza in her hands, her entire worldview cracking like ice under spring sun. The security forces waited for orders that didn't come. The humans held their ground, protective and present, and Zortal watched as 8,000 years of Virkal philosophy trembled on the edge of a single taste. Why? Kelrin's voice was raw. Why does this matter so much to you? Zortal stepped closer, his fear dissolving into clarity. Because I spent 3,000 years being perfect and 0 seconds being happy. Because I met beings who fail constantly and love anyway. Because Marco here lost his father and chose to feed memory, instead of forget it. Because these humans hurt and hope and help each other for no logical reason, except that caring is its own logic. He gestured to the crowd around them. Because they showed me that existence without experience is just waiting to die with extra steps. Because they taught me that efficiency without joy is just a very organized emptiness. But the wars, Kelrin protested, our people destroyed themselves with feeling. Billions died because we wanted too much. No. The voice came from Marco, steady and sure. You destroyed yourselves because you didn't know how to want things together. Because you made feeling into competition instead of connection. Because you loved things instead of each other. He stepped forward, flour still dusting his apron, this human who'd saved an alien through nothing more than shared meals and stubborn kindness. My great-great-grandmother could have kept that starter to herself, he said. Could have used it to get ahead, to make the best pizza, to win some competition. But she shared it, taught others, passed it down. Because she understood that good things aren't meant to be hoarded. They're meant to be fed so they can feed others. He looked at Kelrin directly, this human meeting the gaze of a being who'd lived thousands of years. Your people didn't fail because you felt. You failed because you forgot to teach each other how to feel together. how to want things and share things and care about things without consuming them. That's not a feeling problem. That's a teaching problem. Kelrin's tears fell harder now, her body remembering grief the way it was remembering taste. Full, overwhelming, human. "My family," she whispered. "They died fighting over resources, power, territory, things that didn't matter. I watched my mother kill my father over a philosophical disagreement, watched my siblings turn on each other, and when it was over, when I was alone in the ruins of our household, I swore I would never let feeling do that to me, never let it make me that destructive." "So you chose to never let it make you anything at all," Zortal said gently. "You chose death over risk, emptiness over possible pain, and you convinced yourself it was wisdom. It kept me safe. It kept you alone." The words hung there, truth and accusation and invitation all at once. Around them, Chicago breathed, traffic moved, life continued its messy progression. The universe, utterly indifferent to Virkal philosophy, simply kept being itself. Yuki stepped forward, her voice soft. "After my parents divorced, I didn't talk for a year. Thought if I didn't express emotion, I couldn't get hurt. Know what happened? I just hurt alone, instead of hurt with people who could help. Silence didn't protect me, it just made the pain louder. I lost my son," an older woman added. "Thought I'd never survive it. But Marco here, he made me eat. Literally wouldn't let me starve myself on grief. Said his father taught him that when you can't feed yourself, you let others feed you until you remember how. That's what saved me. Not stopping the feeling. Letting people feel it with me." One by one, the humans shared their stories. Loss and recovery. Pain and resilience. The brutal, beautiful truth that feeling hurt, but numbness killed. That connection risked heartbreak, but isolation guaranteed it. That being human meant accepting hurt as the cost of love and paying it anyway. Kelrin listened, and something in her ancient face began to shift. Recognition. Memory of a time before the Reformation, perhaps, when Virkal had also shared stories, had also comforted each other through pain, had also chosen togetherness despite its complications. "We used to have this," she said quietly. "Before we decided logic was safer than love, we used to sit together and eat and talk and feel things in community. We weren't perfect. We fought and hurt and made terrible choices, but we were alive in ways we haven't been since." She looked at the pizza in her hands, then at Zortal. "You asked why this matters so much to you. Let me tell you why it terrifies me. Because if I admit that eliminating feeling was wrong, then I have to admit we wasted 8,000 years. That we chose extinction over evolution. That we made ourselves into perfect machines and lost every reason machines should exist." "No," Zortal said firmly. "If you admit we were wrong, then you give us a chance to be right again, to evolve instead of stagnate, to remember instead of forget. You give us the chance to live. And if we fail again, if feeling destroys us again, then we fail alive instead of succeed dead." He smiled, that expression his species had engineered away. "And maybe this time we'll have humans to teach us how to feel without destroying, how to want without consuming, how to love without fighting." Kelrin looked at the crowd of humans, at their messy emotions and imperfect solutions and stubborn insistence on caring anyway. She looked at Marco, who'd lost his father and chose to honor him through feeding others. She looked at Zortal, who'd spent 3,000 years perfect and 3 months human and was clearly, obviously happier now. She took another bite of pizza. This time she didn't cry. She tasted, really tasted. Let the flavors build and combine. Let the warmth settle into her bones. Let memory rise up, not of her family's destruction, but of the meals before the war, when they'd eaten together, when food had been love made visible, when they'd been messy and alive and present with each other. "It's good," she said, wonder in her voice. "It's so good."
That's the 200-year-old starter, Marco said. That's memory-made food. That's love that refused to die even when everything around it did. That's humanity. Kelrin finished the slice, looked at her hands, at the humans around her, at Zortal, who'd chosen this over perfection and was clearly, undeniably better for it. I cannot take you back, she said finally. Not because I lack authority, but because taking you would be proof that we learned nothing, that we'd rather eliminate hope than risk change, that we prefer our comfortable death to uncomfortable life. She pulled up her communicator, transmitted directly to the High Council. Her voice was steady, certain, transformed. Council of Elders, this is First Inspector Kelrin. I am filing a formal recommendation for the Second Reformation. The First Reformation eliminated feeling to prevent destruction. I propose we restore feeling and teach wisdom instead. Humanity has demonstrated that emotion is not inherently destructive. Mismanaged emotion is destructive. They hurt and heal. They fight and forgive. They feel everything and survive anyway because they do it together. She paused, looked at Zortal. Ambassador Zortal will remain on Earth as proof of concept. I recommend establishing permanent cultural exchange. Let them teach us how to be alive again. Let us remember that the purpose of evolution is not to become perfect machines, but to become better beings. She closed the transmission, then turned to face the humans. Thank you for contaminating us, for refusing to let us stay safely dead, for teaching an ancient species that we still have things to learn. Marco smiled. Want to stay for dinner? We've got a lot more pizza where that came from. Kelrin looked at the pizzeria, at the tables where humans gathered to share food and stories and connection, at the life she'd denied herself for so long in the name of safety. Yes, she said, I would like that very much. They went inside together. Humans and Virkal, messy and perfect, inefficient and alive. Marco fired up the ovens, Carlos poured wine, Yuki queued up music, and in a small pizzeria in Chicago, revolution continued through the simple act of sharing a meal. Above them, the mothership transmitted Kelrin's recommendation across Virkal space. Millions of perfectly efficient beings received her message. Thousands of years of philosophy questioned. Centuries of certainty dissolved. Some would resist. Some would cling to emptiness rather than risk feeling. But others, isolated in their perfection, would read her words and remember. Remember laughter. Remember taste. Remember what it felt like to want something with your whole being and reach for it anyway. They would remember that being afraid of destruction isn't the same as being alive. That surviving efficiently isn't the same as living fully. That feeling everything, even pain, is better than feeling nothing at all. And slowly, across the galaxy, the vehicle would begin the hard work of remembering how to be human, or as human as an ancient species could be. Learning that wisdom wasn't eliminating emotion but learning to carry it carefully. Like fire, dangerous and necessary, capable of destroying and creating, worth the risk, because the alternative was burning out from cold. 6 months later, New York City hummed with its usual chaos, amplified now by the additions only first contact could bring. Anti-grav bikes wove between yellow cabs. Holographic advertisements competed with neon signs. The Empire State Building stood unchanged, but the beings walking beneath it came from a dozen different worlds. In Greenwich Village, a new establishment had opened. The sign read, Universal Slice in letters that adapted to whatever language the viewer spoke. Inside, the lunch rush was in full swing, and it was a rush unlike anywhere else in the galaxy. At Table 3, a Virkal family sat together, their movements still formal but softening. The parents watched their child bite into pizza with an expression that might have been joy, or might have been remembered pain, or might have been both at once. Learning to feel again was complicated work. Table 7 held a group of Centaurian traders, their forearms making short work of a large pie, while they argued good-naturedly about shipping routes. They'd heard about this place from the Galactic feeds, the restaurant where revolution tasted like tomato and cheese. At the bar, a Zendorian poet scribbled notes,
trying to capture in verse what pizza tasted like to a being whose species experienced flavor as color. Her notebook was full of reds and golds and warmth-given syntax. Behind the counter, Marco Santoro kneaded dough with the easy efficiency of someone who'd done this 10,000 times and would do it 10,000 more. Flour dusted his graying hair. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His smile was constant, genuine, the smile of a man who'd found his father's legacy and grown it into something that spanned star systems. 2 margarita, 1 with the Andromedan spice blend, 1 traditional, Jortal called out, weaving between tables with a grace he'd developed over months of practice. His Vircal precision now served a different purpose, not efficiency for its own sake, but efficiency in service of care. He delivered the pizzas, exchanged pleasantries in 3 different languages, and returned to Marco's side. They worked in comfortable rhythm, a partnership forged in flour and heat and stubborn hope. "Big crowd today," Marco observed. "That's the 4th Vircal family this week." Kelrin's reforms are spreading faster than projected. The Second Reformation is gaining momentum. Thousands of Vircal are requesting cultural immersion on Earth. They want to remember how to feel, and apparently pizza is the gateway drug to emotion. Marco laughed. "Your people have good taste." "We always did. We just forgot how to access it." The door chimed. Kelrin entered, and the transformation 6 months had wrought was remarkable. She still moved with Vircal precision, but there was ease in it now. Her uniform incorporated human elements, efficiency blended with style. Her face, once frozen in neutrality, now showed the full range of what she felt, which today appeared to be exhaustion. "Rough day at the embassy?" Zortal asked, already preparing her usual order. "Mushroom and truffle oil, hold the cheese." She was working up to full dairy. "The council is fighting every reform. Half want to accelerate, half want to return to the old ways. I spent 4 hours mediating an argument about whether laughter should be officially sanctioned or remain a voluntary biological function." She slumped into a booth. "I never thought revolution would involve so much paperwork." "All the best ones do," Marco said, sliding her pizza across. "Eat. You'll feel better." She bit, and tension visibly drained from her shoulders. How do humans do this? Feel everything constantly? The grief and joy and frustration and hope, all mixed together, all demanding attention at once. "Practice," Jortal said, sitting across from her, "and community. When it gets too much, you let others help carry it." "Is that what this place is? Shared weight?" "This place is memory that refused to die," Marco said, joining them with his own slice. "My great-great-grandmother's starter, still alive, still being fed daily. My father's recipes, still being made. Every pizza we serve is proof that love, properly maintained, outlasts everything." He gestured to the crowded restaurant. "These people, from all these worlds, they come here not because the food is the best in the galaxy. They come because here, they're reminded that existence is supposed to mean something, that we're supposed to feel things, that being alive is supposed to be more than just not being dead." The door opened again. A young Vircal entered, maybe 500 cycles old, barely an adult by their standards. She approached the counter with the nervous energy of someone doing something forbidden and necessary. "I heard, Aura," she said quietly, "that you teach people how to laugh." Jortal smiled. "We teach people how to remember. Laughter just tends to follow. Have you ever tasted pizza?" "No, my parents are traditionalists. They think the Reformation is dangerous. That feeling will destroy us again." "It might," Jortal admitted. "Feeling is dangerous, but so is breathing, technically. So is love. So is hope. The question isn't whether it's dangerous. The question is whether it's worth the risk." He prepared a simple margarita, the same one Marco had served him that first day. He watched her bite, watched her freeze, watched 8,000 years of genetic engineering collapse under the weight of tomato and basil and memory. She laughed, then cried, then laughed again. "It's so much," she gasped. How do you manage so much all at once?" "One bite at a time," Marco said gently. "That's the secret. You don't handle it all at once. You just handle the next moment, then the next. Then eventually you look back and realize you've been handling it all along." More customers arrived. A family of humans celebrating a birthday. Andromedan scholars researching Earth cuisine. A Centaurian couple on their first date trying this thing called romance they'd heard was quintessentially human. The restaurant filled with voices, laughter, argument, connection. The chaos humans had perfected, and aliens were learning to navigate. It was inefficient. It was loud. It was absolutely beautiful. As evening approached and the dinner rush began, Kelrin stood to leave. She paused at the door, looked back at Jortal and Marco and the impossible thing they'd built together. "Do you know what the Council calls this place?" she asked. "What?" "The contamination zone. They use it as proof that Earth is dangerous, that human influence corrupts Virkal purity." "And what do you call it?" Marco asked. She smiled, real and warm, and evidence that change was possible. "Hope. I call it hope. Because if this works, if we can teach ourselves to feel again without destroying each other, then we prove that the Reformation was wrong, that the answer to feeling too much isn't feeling nothing. It's learning to feel together." She left, and Jortal watched her go, this being who'd come to extract him and stayed to be transformed herself, who'd tasted pizza and remembered her species used to be alive, who was now fighting every day to drag the Virkal kicking and screaming back into existence. "She's going to change the galaxy," Marco said. "We already did," Jortal replied, "one slice at a time." As night fell over New York, more beings arrived. The restaurant never closed anymore, not really. There was always someone who needed feeding, someone learning to laugh for the first time, someone remembering what it meant to want something and reach for it anyway. In the kitchen, the 200-year-old starter bubbled contentedly, fed daily by Marco's hands, used constantly to make bread that taught aliens how to be human. It had survived wars and oceans and time itself, not because it was strong, but because someone, always, had chosen to care for it. Just like humanity, not strong because they were perfect, but strong because they chose, every day, to care for imperfect things anyway, to maintain memory, to feed hope, to show up for each other even when it cost them. That night, as Jortal cleaned tables and Marco prepped for tomorrow, they worked in comfortable silence. Partners, friends, family in the way humans defined it, which was to say people who chose each other and kept choosing each other even when it was hard. "You ever regret it?" Marco asked. "Giving up your species for this?" Jortal looked around the restaurant, at the evidence of lives touched and changed, at the beings from across the galaxy learning to feel again, at the simple truth that caring mattered, that memory lived, that one person choosing warmth over efficiency could start a revolution. "I didn't give up my species," he said quietly. "I saved it, just not in the way anyone expected." Marco smiled, understanding without words, the way he always did. They finished cleanup, locked the door, and stood together looking at the sign above the entrance, Universal Slice, where beings from across the galaxy came to remember what living felt like. Tomorrow, more would come. More Virkal learning to laugh. More aliens discovering pizza. More proof that the human way, messy and inefficient and beautiful, might just be the way forward for everyone. Because in the end, the galaxy didn't need perfect beings. It needed beings willing to be imperfect together, willing to hurt and hope and help each other, willing to maintain memory and feed love, and choose warmth even when cold was safer. The universe was vast and old and full of species that had achieved perfect efficiency. But only one species had figured out how to transform survival into flavor, loneliness into community, and mere existence into actual living. They came to Earth expecting to evaluate humanity's worthiness. Instead, they discovered something that would reshape galactic civilization. They discovered that humans didn't conquer through power. They conquered through pizza, through stubborn insistence on caring, through choosing to feel everything and somehow surviving it, through proving, one meal at a time, that the meaning of life wasn't to exist efficiently. It was to live fully, laugh freely, and share warmth with whoever was hungry. Above the restaurant, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. Ships from a dozen worlds descended toward Earth, their occupants seeking the same thing Zortal had found: connection, purpose, the courage to feel. And in a small kitchen in New York, a 200-year-old starter was fed by human hands, kept alive by care, waiting to teach tomorrow's visitors the same lesson it had taught for generations. That love, properly maintained, outlasts everything. Even 8,000 years of forgetting, even death itself, especially death itself. Because humans had always known something the rest of the galaxy was just learning: that the opposite of death wasn't existence. It was living so fully that your memory became food for those who came after. It was choosing warmth. It was feeding hope. It was refusing to let the good things die, one stubborn, beautiful, inefficient meal at a time. Humanity, oh yeah, in the end, Zortal's journey reminded us of a strangely comforting truth. Humanity's greatest technology was never fire, steel, or starships. It was the reckless, stubborn decision to feel things deeply, even when it breaks us open. In a galaxy obsessed with perfection, humans proved that the most radical act is simply choosing to be alive on purpose. But now it's your turn to sit with the heat of this story. What part of yourself have you silenced in the name of efficiency, and why?